everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got an epic show ahead, but just remember, if any of you have experiences you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. You can either email me at paranormalportalradio@gmail.com or head over to paranormalportal.net and scroll down and find the button that says Interview Me, and that'll allow you to look at a calendar of possible times and dates and find a date that works for you. Love to hear your stories, so definitely get in touch with me. On this episode, we're talking about aggressive Bigfoot encounters. And I know right out of the gate that people come at this subject from very different angles. Some people believe these things, if they exist, are probably peaceful, guardians, caretakers of wild places, something that wants distance and privacy, and only shows itself when it chooses to. Other people believe it's much more straightforward. An unknown ape, a flesh and blood animal that's avoided discovery for a long time because the places it lives are hard to access, and because it's good at staying out of our way. And then there are the people who take it in an entirely different direction. Nephilim theories, spiritual theories, interdimensional theories, things that step between realities. And I'm not here to tell you which of those is right, because the truth is, nobody can say for sure. What we can do is listen carefully to what people report, and pay attention to patterns that show up over and over again. Most Bigfoot encounters people talk about aren't violent. A lot of them are quiet, a glimpse at a distance, a silhouette crossing a road, a weird sound at night, a feeling of being watched that never turns into anything more. But there are also reports of where the tone changes, where that behavior shifts, where people don't feel like they're simply sharing the woods with something unknown. They feel like they're being pressured out of an area. And that's what we're dealing with here. I want to be careful about the word aggressive because aggressive doesn't always mean violent. A lot of what witnesses describe in these moments stop short of an attack, but it also isn't neutral. It's pressure. It's escalation. It's a situation that doesn't settle down until the witness leaves. And I'll also say this up front. I don't think these beings, whatever they are, go out of their way to hurt people. I don't think that's the default. But there are enough reports of intimidation, threat, behavior, and escalation that it's worth looking at, honestly, without exaggerating it and without ignoring it. So that's what we're doing here. We're going to walk through a series of reported experiences that build in intensity. We'll start with something that's unsettling but restrained, and we'll keep moving forward until we reach the kind of encounter that leaves a person with no doubt that they were in a dangerous situation. And as always, you decide what you think it was. Most of the encounters that we're going to talk about on this episode don't begin with fear. They begin when something that should have moved on doesn't. This first encounter was reported by a solo hiker traveling through a remote, heavily wooded area during daylight hours. The witness was on foot, moving steadily through terrain where sound usually carries clearly. According to the reports, the witness began hearing heavy footsteps off to one side of the trail. The sound was coming from the woods and not the trail itself. The witness specifically noted that the footsteps sounded bipedal, a steady, 2-beat walking cadence, rather than the uneven rhythm typically associated with the 4-legged animals. Well, at first the witness assumed it might be another person coming nearby. The report states that when the witness stopped walking, the footsteps he was hearing also stopped. And when the witness began moving again, the footsteps resumed, keeping position off to the side, out of sight, and continuing at a similar pace. This stop and start pattern repeated multiple times. The source of the movement was never seen. The report notes that the footsteps did not rush away, scatter, or break into brush in a way that suggested an animal fleeing. The movement remained controlled and out of view. After a period of time, the witness altered course and began moving back toward the direction that they had come from. As the witness withdrew, the footsteps continued briefly and then stopped. No objects were reportedly thrown. There was no vocalizations reported, and there was absolutely no visual contact at all. The encounter ended without further incident, but the witness stated that they felt compelled to leave the area earlier than they planned. This is a good place to start because it's subtle. There's no big moments where something explodes into chaos. It's just pressure. And the bipedal detail matters because it's one of the first things witnesses bring up when they're trying to explain why they didn't just write it off as a deer or a bear. I'm not saying that it makes it proof. I'm just saying it's part of why this kind of report sticks with people. The timing, the pacing, the way it seems to mirror movements instead of just moving off. And what's interesting is the ending. There's no chase scene, no sprinting through the forest. The witness just leaves earlier than planned because the situation doesn't settle. And that's the tone we're starting with. The second encounter was reported by a solo hunter scouting a remote, heavily wooded area during daylight hours. The witness described the area as quiet and far from roads or homes. According to the report, the witness became aware of heavy footsteps off to one side. Again, described as bipedal in cadence, steady and controlled. The report states that when the witness stopped, the footsteps also stopped. When the witness moved, the footsteps resumed. After several minutes of this, the report says the witness heard a single loud knock, followed by a second knock several seconds later. The knocks were described as sharp and deliberate, not consistent with random branch noise. The report notes that the knocks came from deeper into the woods, offset from direction of the footsteps. After the knocks, the bipedal movement continued. The report also mentions additional sounds, heavy movements in brush, and at least one instance of a branch being snapped loudly, enough to be clearly heard. Now, throughout this encounter, no source was ever seen. The report also states that the sounds did not scatter or flee the way that witnesses would normally expect from wildlife activity. After a period of time, the witness chose to leave the area. As the witness withdrew, the sounds continued briefly and then again stopped. In this one as well, no objects were reportedly thrown. There were no vocalizations reported, and there was no visual contact either. And this is where it starts to feel less passive. In the first report, the witness hears pacing, and that's enough to decide, I'm done here. In this one, pacing is still there, but now the environment gets loud on purpose. Knocks, a big clean branch snap, heavy movement. It's the kind of thing that makes a person stop trying to talk themselves out of what they're hearing. And you'll notice what still isn't happening in this encounter. Nothing shows itself. There's no reveal. No clear animal moving through the brush where you can say, oh, okay, that was just a bear. It stays out of sight. It keeps the witness in that uncomfortable space where you're trying to make sense of it, but you can't. And again, once the person leaves, it stops. The third encounter was reported by a solo camper who was traveling through a remote forested area in the late afternoon and early evening. The witness reported stopping to rest and prepare a temporary camp, well away from the roads or developed trails. According to the report, while setting up the camp, the witness became aware of movement in the woods off to one side. The sound was described as bipedal footsteps, steady and controlled, remaining out of sight but close enough to be clearly heard. The report states that as the witness moved around the campsite, the footsteps moved as well. When the witness stopped, the movement stopped. When the witness resumed activity, the movement resumed as well. After several minutes, the report says the witness heard a small object strike the ground nearby. It landed close enough to be clearly heard, but did not make contact with the witness. Shortly after, a second object landed from a slightly different direction. The witness described the objects as small stones or debris, small enough not to cause injury, but thrown with force rather than falling naturally. No source was ever seen. The report states that the footsteps continued intermittently while the objects were thrown, remaining out of view and maintaining distance. The witness did not report panic, but did describe growing unease and pressure, particularly because the objects were landing near the camp rather than deeper in the woods. After several more minutes, the report says the witness abandoned the campsite and just left the area. As the witness withdrew, no further objects were reportedly thrown, and the movement ceased shortly afterward. No vocalizations or visual contact were reported in this incident at all. This stage shows up in many aggressive encounters because it changes the interaction. Small thrown objects don't cause harm, but they're difficult to ignore, especially when they land close and from varying directions. Witnesses often say this is the point where the situation just stops feeling passive. Importantly, these early objects are usually described as measured. They're not meant to injure, they're just meant to be noticed. And once objects enter the encounter, people often report that staying no longer feels like a reasonable option, even if nothing overtly threatening has happened yet. After that third encounter, you can start to see how these things build. It doesn't jump straight to chaos. It starts with pacing. Then there's noise. Then something lands a little too close to ignore. And for a lot of people, that's the point where it stops feeling abstract. Up until then, you can tell yourself it's an animal, or a coincidence, or just the woods being the woods. But once something is landing near your camp, and once it's clearly interacting with your space, it's become completely different. And the next report moves past that line. And this is where the distance really goes away. The fourth encounter was reported by a camper who was alone in a remote wooded area, staying overnight well away from roads or homes. The camp was established before dark, and nothing unusual was reported during the early evening. According to the report, the activity began sometime after nightfall, while the witness was inside a tent. The report states the witness heard slow, deliberate footsteps moving around the perimeter of the campsite. The cadence was described as bipedal, steady and evenly spaced. The report notes the movement did not pass through the area. It circled it. At times, the footsteps would stop for extended periods. Then they would resume, even closer than before. The report states the witness heard movement directly beside the tent, close enough to hear weight shift on the ground. At one point, the report says something made contact with the outside of the tent itself. The witness described it as pressure against the fabric, pushing in from the outside without tearing or striking. No vocalizations at all were reported. The report states the activity continued intermittently for an extended period. The witness remained inside the tent and did not attempt to leave while the movement was active. Eventually, the report says the footsteps moved away from the immediate area. Well, at first light, the witness packed up and just left. They did not stay another night. No visual contact was reported. No objects were reportedly thrown during this encounter, and no injury was reported. This one hits differently because there is no distance anymore. Earlier reports stay out in the trees, and you can still pretend there's a buffer between you and whatever is doing it. A tent doesn't feel like much of a buffer at all. And what stands out here is the restraint. No screaming, no attack, no tearing at the tent. Just proximity, circling, contact, and then it backs off when the person stays put and just waits it out. Now, for the record, that's not me saying that means something. It's just what the report describes. And a lot of people would say that kind of restraint is part of what makes it so unsettling. The fifth encounter comes from a witness who was alone in a remote forested area during daylight hours. They were on foot several miles from their vehicle, deep enough into the woods that turning back wasn't casual. It really meant a long walk. The first sign that something wasn't right was movement. Not random woodland noise, but bipedal footsteps. They were heavy and measured, and keeping pace once again off to the side. Out of sight, and every time the witness slowed, the steps slowed, and when they moved forward, it moved forward. There wasn't any visual confirmation, just the weight of something large, choosing to remain parallel in the trees. After several minutes of this, the atmosphere shifted. The report states that larger objects began coming from the tree line. These weren't twigs or just pine cones. They were heavy impacts, one after another, thrown with enough force that when they struck the ground, there was no mistaking intention. One landed extremely close to the witness's position, close enough to remove any doubt that this was random. At that point, this wasn't background noise. It was targeted, and then it escalated. What happened next wasn't simply movement through the brush. It was a charge. The witness described it as something massive plowing through dense growth that should have slowed anything down. Thick brush snapping, branches breaking, the kind of explosive forward momentum that doesn't weave around obstacles. It destroys them. The footfalls were described as heavy and rapid, each impact striking the ground with enough force to be felt. It wasn't circling. It wasn't repositioning. It was coming straight in. In that instant, the witness believed that they were about to get hit. The distance closed fast enough that there was no time to process what it might be. Just the certainty that something enormous had committed to the line that it was on. And then it stopped. Abruptly. No body bursting from the tree line. No visual confirmation. Just a sudden, absolute halt. As if something with immense power had surged forward to the edge of contact and then chosen not to complete it. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was realization. Whatever was there had the ability to reach them and had decided not to. The witness immediately turned and moved quickly back the way that they had come. For a short distance, the sounds continued behind them. Movement in the brush, presence, maintaining proximity. And then it ceased. No physical contact was reported. No injury was reported. And the witness didn't ever return to that area. In this encounter, this is one of the places where normal falls apart. Because once you're talking about heavy objects landing close and sudden rushing movement that stops short, you're not in the world of maybe it's a deer anymore. And still, what's interesting is how often these reports stop short of physical contact. That doesn't make it less serious. It just means the threat behavior is enough to end the encounter without it turning into an actual attack. And people generally leave fast. The sixth and final encounter was reported by a hunter alone in a remote forested area during daylight hours. He was several miles from his vehicle, moving through dense terrain where visibility was limited and sound carried strangely through the timber. Earlier in the experience, he had already noticed bipedal movement pacing him off to one side. Heavy footsteps, measured, keeping distance but not losing him. By the time the most aggressive behavior began, he was no longer curious. He was leaving. He turned back along his route and began moving quickly. And that's when the pacing stopped being parallel, and it started closing. The footsteps behind him increased in speed. Not subtle now, deliberate, gaining. Then something changed. He began hearing movement not just behind him, but to the side, and at times ahead. It no longer felt like something trailing him in the woods. It felt like something cutting angles, intercepting. The terrain was thick, visibility broken by brush and trunks. Every step forward required pushing through growth. And yet whatever was moving around him seemed to pass through it without hesitation. Objects began striking trees. Heavy impacts, not tossed casually, thrown with force. Some hit ahead of him, slamming into trunks or crashing into the ground in his path, forcing him to veer off course. And that's when the realization set in. This wasn't random intimidation. This was control. And he wasn't choosing his route anymore. It was being chosen for him. At one point, as he shifted direction again, he heard heavy movement directly in front of him. Close close enough that he could feel the compression of space, followed by a violent impact against a tree. The sound was described as solid, substantial, as if something with real mass had struck wood with force. That was the moment. The report states this is when he believed the situation had shifted from intimidation to immediate danger. Mortality wasn't abstract anymore. It was present. As he pivoted again, he caught a brief visual. A large upright figure, bipedal, moving through the trees at close range. The sighting was fleeting. No facial detail, no prolonged observation. Just confirmation that the presence had shape and height and was moving with speed through terrain that slowed him to a crawl. He didn't stop to study it. He ran. And this time it pursued. For a short distance, the movement matched his retreat. Heavy, fast, tracking. And then it stopped. Abruptly. No gradual fade. No lingering noise. Just a sudden absence. He reached his vehicle without further incident and left the area immediately. No injury was reported, and once again, he never returned. After something like that, most people don't sit down and write notes in the moments. They just get out. They get distance. And then later, after the adrenaline wears off, that's when they start replaying it. The part that sticks isn't just that something was out there. It's that the witness is trying to leave, and the situation doesn't simply fade away the way most wilderness encounters do. It stays with them. It tightens. It shows up where it shouldn't. And that's the part that shifts the memory from weird to dangerous. As an additional bonus, I'm going to give you a seventh encounter. In 2017, John and a group of cadets were conducting a field training exercise near Tenino, Washington. It wasn't recreational camping, it was structured training. Staff tents, cadets, a central campfire, a perimeter, firearms, radios, organization. The first night they heard tree knocks. At the time, it was curious to them, but not alarming. They noted it, but no one felt threatened, and it didn't feel personal. Just something happening in the woods. The second night was different. Around 1:30 or 1:30 in the morning, everything changed. John describes it as a loud, chilling, otherworldly yell. It wasn't just a short scream, and it wasn't a quick bark. It was sustained, 25 to 30 seconds in one breath. Long enough that the brain struggles to process how anything could hold that much air. The sound pulled every staff member out of their tents, immediately. Not slowly, not confused. Lightning fast. Everybody was on high alert. John is a hunter and a fisherman, and he spends a lot of time outdoors. He knows elk, he knows coyote, he knows bears, and he knows what large mammals sound like. He says he has never heard anything like that in his entire life. He describes it as layered, almost like multiple sets of vocal cords activating all at once. Different octaves, different pitches, but wrapped together in a single sound. And there was something else. He said there was an infrasound quality to it, a low-frequency vibration riding underneath the scream. He didn't just hear it, he felt it, like a pressure wave. He describes it as passing through his body, vibrating his vital organs, a ripple through his guts. It wasn't just noise in the distance, it was almost physical. The second vocalization came not long after, and by that point they were back in their tents, drawing firearms. But John says something really important here. For the first time in his life, holding a weapon did not make him feel secure. He still felt vulnerable, utterly helpless. And that's not a casual statement. This is a man leading cadets on a training exercise, and he was armed. He was responsible for others, and the sound alone stripped him of all of his confidence. After the vocalizations, they began hearing tree knocks again, but not from the same direction. There were knocks from one side of the field, then another vocalization from the opposite tree line, then tree knocks from that side. John doesn't know whether there were two of them communicating across the field or one circling and repositioning. But what he is certain of is this. It sounded aggressive. It did not sound pleased that they were there. And there was another problem. They were illuminated. The bonfire in the center of the camp was still glowing. They were standing in the light. The tree light beyond the firelight was black. If something was out there, it could see them clearly, but they could not see it. John says he hated that. They were at a tactical disadvantage. They were exposed and visible. He says he wished that he'd brought the night vision gear because in that moment, being armed just wasn't enough. They were blind beyond the fire's reach. And then the rocks started. A rock was thrown directly at their campfire. It landed near where the staff were standing, in the middle of a conversation about what to do next. It wasn't random debris falling. It was thrown. Then another. And another. It wasn't a barrage. It was periodic and measured. Enough to make sure they knew they were being targeted. They never saw it. Whatever was making the sounds remained beyond the glow of the fire. But it was close enough to throw with accuracy, and strong enough to project rocks into the center of their camp. Well, eventually the vocalization stopped, and the knocks stopped, and then the rocks stopped. But no one slept. They stayed up, and they remained on watch until sunrise. Not one person drifted off, and nobody relaxed. When daylight finally did break, they packed up, and they left. Take a second and just sit with that. You've got trained adults who are armed, running a structured field exercise, and the whole tone of the night shifts because of sound. That line keeps coming back to me when he says that for the first time, he didn't have confidence in his weapon. That's not something people say lightly, especially not someone who spends time outdoors, especially not someone who's responsible for other people. It wasn't just loud. It was long. 25 to 30 seconds in one breath. That's the kind of thing your brain keeps replaying later because it doesn't fit into anything familiar. And then there's the physical part of it, the way he describes the feeling of it moving through him. You can debate what that means, but you can't debate that he experienced it. And what happened after is just as interesting. It doesn't rush them. and it doesn't charge into camp. It stays back, moves from one side of the field then to the other, knocks from here, then from there. Maybe two of them, maybe one moving incredibly quickly. But either way, it's not just random noise. It's positioning. And the firelight detail is hard to ignore. They're lit up, silhouetted. Whatever is out there isn't. And that flips the whole dynamic. You're armed, but you can't see past the glow. You know something's out there. You know it's close enough to throw a rock into your fire, but you just can't put your eyes on it. And that does something to a person. And then it just stops. No charge, no follow through. Just enough to make sure they understand that they weren't alone. And by morning, they pack up and leave. When you lay this encounter next to the earlier encounters we talked about, you start noticing how often it unfolds in steps. It doesn't usually begin with the maximum intensity. It builds. And it tends to stop once people leave or daylight shows up. That doesn't answer the big question of what these things are, but it does tell you something about the behavior people keep describing. Whatever it is, it doesn't always need to make contact to make an impression. Sometimes the sound alone is enough. And through all these reports, the patterns emerge. These patterns seem to indicate a profound strategic intelligence. When you hear enough of these accounts, you start noticing that they don't usually jump straight to the worst part. There's often a build. It starts with something nearby that doesn't move off the way you'd expect it to. Footsteps that keep pace, movement that matches yours instead of crossing away. Then there's noise. Knocks, branches breaking, sounds that feel intentional. If that doesn't end it, objects sometimes come next. Small at first, landing close that you just can't ignore them. And if the person still stays, that's when things get uncomfortable. Camps get circled, the distance disappears and the space tightens. And in the most extreme cases, like the one we just covered, it goes further. Larger objects, sudden movements, something getting ahead of you instead of just simply trailing behind. What stands out isn't just the intensity, it's the way that it builds. Not all at once, not chaotic. More often than not, once the person leaves, the activity just stops. And that's interesting, because in most wilderness encounters, animals avoid prolonged engagement with people. They either slip away quietly or react quickly and then create distance. What's described in these reports doesn't usually resolve that way. So where does this all leave us? It doesn't leave us with any neat answers, but none of this stuff ever does. But what it does leave us with is behavior that we can look at. These reports, especially the aggressive ones, don't read like a random series of accidents. They don't feel like people stumbling into an animal that panics and bolts. They read like escalating pressure that ends when the person gives up the space and leaves. That doesn't really tell us what Bigfoot is. It doesn't tell us what it wants. But it does tell us this. Whatever is behind these reports, whether it's a flesh and blood animal, something we haven't categorized yet, or even something stranger, the behavior people describe is controlled enough that it leaves a mark. It's almost intelligent. Not because it's dramatic, because it's consistent. And if you spend time outdoors, you know how rare that kind of consistency is across unrelated experiences. If you've had an encounter like this, especially one that escalated, take care of yourself first, get safe, get out. And then if you want to share it, you can always reach out. I read what you send. Until next time, keep your eyes open and take the woods seriously. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for us today. So hope you guys enjoyed the show, and thank you again so much for all your love and support. And remember, if you want to follow the Paranormal Portal, probably the easiest way is to head over to paranormalportal.net. And that's the homepage for the Paranormal Portal. And you'll find links to all of our different social media and sites and information about the shows, including our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/paranormalportal. Or just look for Paranormal Portal on Google or whatever search engine, and you'll find links to our social media such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. So we're kind of all over the place, and we're spreading as well as we can. But anyway, thank you so much for the love and support. Y'all take care, and remember, we love y'all. Be good, be kind, be nice. Take care of each other, help each other out, find the magic in every day, and remember to laugh as much as you can. Until next time.